While recent decades have seen the American motor market open up to increasing numbers of foreign builds, one constant, even at the height of their isolation, has been the presence of European brands, and until as late as the 1980s, among these importers was the mass-market British car makers of BMC and later British Leyland. Although Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Land Rover, Aston Martin and Jaguar continued to provide the American market with high-end and luxury vehicles, UK-built low-end and executive mass-production cars were once a prominent feature in America, including the likes of the Rover P6 and the SD1 during the 1970s. However, after half a decade of absence following the failure of the SD1, the Rover Group attempted to fight its way back into the USA by launching the Sterling, a rebadged version of the Rover 800 made exclusively for the American market, but one that was so wrong-headed in its conception, management and construction that it would ultimately become the last stand of the British mass-production motor industry in the United States. As mentioned, Britain once had a strong influence on the American motoring market, starting in the early days when luxury models like Rolls-Royce and Bentley products were sold to the ultra-rich, including industrialists and politicians, the popularity of these cars being so great that there was even a short-lived domestic production of Rolls-Royce Phantom 1s at a factory in Springfield, Massachusetts between 1926 and 1931. In the years following World War II, America's domestic car makers were at the peak of their powers, but British car companies continued to find a place on the US stage through a variety of means, the majority of British cars sold in America being done directly under their original brand, but with minor mechanical and cosmetic changes to suit American tastes and legislation. Early examples during the 1960s were the likes of the Austin America, a rebadged left-hand drive version of the Austin 1100 that proved to be somewhat popular in the USA, while Land Rover, MG and Austin Healey were able to find an immediate appeal on the American market, with the original Land Rover, the MGB and the Austin Healey Sprite being very successful in the United States. Perhaps the most notable British car to be sold in America during the 1950s and 60s was the Metropolitan, a subcompact economy car built by Austin at their Longbridge factory near Birmingham and marketed in the United States through Nash dealerships and under the Nash mark for brand recognition. The Nash Metropolitan was initially not a very successful model, but following the Eisenhower recession of 1958, a sudden surge in the sales of economy cars made the plucky Metropolitan the second best-selling foreign car in the USA behind the Volkswagen Beetle, though with the newly formed AMC moving to create its own economic machines, the arrangement with BMC would come to an end by the mid-1960s. Following the end of the Metropolitan, car builders such as BMC and later British Leyland would go back to selling their models directly on the American market through their own dealer networks, though for the British Leyland management, the desire to sell smash hits in the USA became almost an obsession, one that essentially sacrificed all other aspects to ensure their models met US safety and emissions regulations to the letter. While the drive to develop cars that would be sold in America was not a flawed one, the manner in which the British Leyland management attempted to introduce these cars was a catalogue of mistakes and missed opportunities. The Morris Marina, which was sold in the States as the Austin Marina, failing to garner any real attention due to its inherent design flaws and reliability concerns. This was followed by the first dedicated car sold for the American market, the Triumph TR7 of 1976, a concept doomed to failure due to reliability problems, a poor design, and styling that tried to marry the trend for wedge-shaped sports cars with the required safety apparatus of US legislation. This, in combination with crippling strike action at its original Speak factory, leading eventually to its closure and the relocation of TR7 production to the main Triumph plant at Canley near Coventry, meant only a small number of these cars would make it to the United States, with those that did manage to arrive on American shores being lambasted for their woeful build quality. By the end of the decade, the only British cars selling in notable numbers were legacy sports cars from before the British Leyland merger, including the MGB, the Austin Healey Sprite, the MG Midget and the Triumph Spitfire, cars which had garnered their fame through charming style and endearing performance that was once a world leader in terms of cheap but perky motoring fun. Sadly, British Leyland's fixation on meeting American safety and emissions legislation, but their inability to commit to full redesigns of the cars due to their collapsing finances, meant the performance and image of these models was tarnished by safety applications and mechanical alterations, leaving unsold units either languishing on the showroom floor for months or sitting in stockyards awaiting an uncertain future. Finally, there was the Rover SD1, an executive saloon that had been launched in 1977 to critical acclaim, but although it was a commercial success on the domestic UK market, in America, the car was a huge failure for British Leyland. The reasons, while open to speculation, were due to a mixture of the weak value of the American dollar against European currencies at the time, which rendered imports relatively expensive when compared to home-built products, a significant rise in fuel prices following the 1979 oil crisis, which made the Rover 3.5-litre V8 unattractive, and a lack of public awareness due to the company's very limited dealership network. This was compounded further by the expense of modifying the SD1 to comply with US legislation, thus resulting in a total of only 1,254 SD1s being sold in the United States, with those left on sale after 1981 rotting in dealerships for over a year. The SD1's failure, combined with British Leyland's attempts to recover from their 1975 bankruptcy, meaning that the company made no further attempts to enter the American market in the early 1980s. By 1984, British Leyland's management were acutely aware of the reasons why the SD1 was a failure in the USA, but felt that relaunching the Rover brand stateside so soon after the company's previous withdrawal would be unviable, and thus the management chose instead to create a new mark for US export versions of their upcoming models, this being dubbed the Sterling. The establishment of Sterling came hand in hand with the privatisation of British Leyland under the Thatcher government in 1986, with the firm being sold to British Aerospace and renamed the Rover Group, retaining only the Rover, MG and Land Rover marks. As privatisation was undertaken, the company was in the midst of designing their new executive saloon to replace the SD1, the Rover 800, a car that had been in the works since as early as 1979, but gathered enough pace to see it through to completion, following the deal brokered between British Leyland and Japanese car maker Honda in 1980 to supply parts and mechanical elements for BL products to improve their reliability. The result was a mixture of BL models based directly off Honda cars, such as the Triumph Acclaim and the Rover 200, while other Leyland motors introduced Honda mechanics to improve their overall reliability, the Rover 800 falling into the former category, as it was based primarily on the Honda Legend saloon, including the same drivetrain, body panels and other mechanical elements. The upcoming Sterling equivalent, therefore, would comprise two models, the 825 Saloon and the 827 5-door hatchback, and prior to the start of sales, British Leyland created an entirely new subsidiary known as Arkona, or Austin Rover Cars of North America, as co-owned by entrepreneur Norman Brahman, with Arkona's president Raymond Ketledge establishing the company headquarters in Miami during 1986. Much work went into developing brand recognition long before the launch of the European Rover 800, with the result that, by early 1986, 135 retail outlets were signed up to the Sterling scheme, with Arkona stating they would need 30,000 sterlings in place for the product's launch in February 1987. With 135 retailers on board, confidence was very high for the Sterling brand, the marketing team using the car's mixture of Japanese reliability and British luxury as a means of carving out a niche against the likes of Audi, BMW and Mercedes. Assurance was further spurred on by the car's comparatively low price tag, with the 825S base model entering sales at $20,000 or $45,800 in 2024, while the 825 SL high-end variant was available at $25,000 or $57,200 in 2024. By comparison, European models were generally more expensive, with the 1987 BMW 325 costing $21,000, the Mercedes-Benz W124 costing $22,000, and the Audi 100 costing $18,000, but American equivalents were cheaper, the Mercury Sable costing $12,500 and the Buick LeSabre costing $13,900. Regardless, the car was launched across the USA at retailers in Texas, Florida, California and the Northeast Seaboard, being marketed towards the high-flying business executives of New York, Washington, D.C., Miami, Houston and Los Angeles, with initial forecasts being that once the Sterling range had been rolled out, it would account for 40% of Rover 800 production at the Cowley factory. The onward success of the Sterling would subsequently give rise to a stylish coupe version of the 800 that was initially developed as the Rover CCV or Coupe Concept Vehicle, a low-slung two-door machine that was purpose-built to cruise down the wide boulevards of Beverly Hills, this car being initially a styling exercise, but one that had great promise should the Sterling be the hit expected by the Rover management. In spite of such confidence, when the first sales sheets rolled across the boardroom table, it was apparent that Sterling was in serious trouble. A mixture of poor brand recognition, substandard build quality on early cars, and underwhelming performance, meaning that, in its first full year, only 14,171 Sterlings were sold, far below initial predictions. Problems related to the Sterling were primarily found in the warmer regions of the United States where the car was sold, specifically Florida, Texas, and California, where the leather upholstery would spoil and turn green in the heat, while the air conditioning units were riddled with faults and failures that would make the cabin unbearable for occupants. Customer reactions were very hostile, with troublesome Sterlings being returned to dealers all across America to rectify their many faults, as combined with significant warranty claims, engineers from the Cowley plant in England being flown out to fix the returned cars, with anywhere between 10 and 16 units on the forecourt awaiting remediation at one time, while every one unit repaired was replaced by another 2 returned by customers. Aside from mechanical failures, the 800 was a comparatively mundane machine for an executive saloon built to rival the likes of Audi, BMW, and Mercedes, while its Japanese origins, despite the best intentions, were another major hurdle the car had to overcome. The Honda Legend off which it was based, for instance, had been on sale since 1985 in both the UK and USA, being marketed in America as the Acura Legend with an MSRP of $20,700, almost identical to the Sterling 800, the wood veneer and leather seats provided by the Sterling being no substitute for the unbeatable reliability and quality finish of the Acura. In desperation, Canadian-born chairman of Rover Group, Graham Day, made Arkona a full subsidiary of the Rover Group in 1989, with new president Graham Morris charged with the task of getting Sterling back on track, renaming Arkona to Sterling Motor Cars Incorporated, while placing a new emphasis on quality and service. The damage was already done, though, and 1987 was Sterling's best year, after which sales incrementally declined, with 8,901 units sold in 1988, 5,907 in 1989, and 4,015 in 1990, barely a scratch against the 50,000-plus Mercedes, BMWs, and Audis being sold during the same period, as well as domestic Mercurys and Buicks, and the ever-present Acura Legend. In a frantic bid to stir up interest, Rover released concept drawings of the upcoming R17 facelift, which was to be applied across the company range, elements of which included a smoother profile, revised light clusters, improved interior refinement, and the fitting of a Regal radiator grille, as well as the promise of a coupe version of the car. In the long term, the tarnished Sterling brand would be dropped, and cars would be sold under the Rover name once again, but before any of these ideas ever came to fruition, the company chose to drop the Sterling scheme in August 1991 in the face of dwindling sales and ever-rising costs. Instead, the Rover Group would invest in the Land Rover division, which had seen the formal introduction of the Range Rover to the American market in 1987 and proved to be a substantial hit with US buyers. The Range Rover meant to go hand in hand with the Sterling as a combined package of a luxury SUV and an executive car. In the end, Rover would simply leave the Range Rover, as well as other Land Rover products like the Discovery, to maintain a presence on the American market alone, while in the wake of Sterling's disastrous tenure in the United States, the company would withdraw any further proposals to return stateside during its tenure under British Aerospace. The last car to be potentially mooted for possible sale in the United States would be the MGF of 1995, which had all the momentum to be a huge sales success had it been given the opportunity to be marketed in America, presenting the same cheap but perky performance and drop-top charm that had made the likes of the MGB and the Spitfire such commercial winners back in the 1960s and 70s. However, by the time of the MGF's launch, Rover was firmly in the hands of BMW, who were also in the process of releasing their own roadster on the American market in the form of the Z3, and thus, in order to avoid the possibility of the MG stealing sales from the BMW, the British convertible was barred from sales in the USA, killing what could have been a saviour for the Rover Group during its dying days. In the end, the Sterling project, while based on sensible intentions, was a scheme doomed from the start, thanks to the managerial, conceptual and construction mistakes made throughout the entire course of its existence. Despite having the support of Honda, and the already well-established reputation that car builder had in America to back up its potential credibility, the simple reality was that the initial batch of poorly built cars immediately set the tone for potential customers who were seeking what should have been the perfect mixture of Japanese reliability with British charm and ambience. Instead, what customers were presented with was a machine of dubious quality that failed to live up to any of the expectations set for it, and with its first impressions having been sullied during the first year, there was no possibility of the car making a resurgence amid a market already fully saturated with other executive models, including the very car off which it was originally based.